Good morning, everybody. This is an amazing morning. A beautiful sunrise. The sun's just poking up over the trees now, as you can tell. And I'm in the grasslands. I love this location. And there's so much bird activity right now. And I just found a northern harrier that is perched up on an old telephone pole. And it is just sitting there. Beautiful. Okay, now that the initial excitement of the morning is done, the sun is now up, it's kind of behind some clouds now, the northern harriers have moved on. This video is going to be about the tips and techniques I use to photograph and enjoy photographing birds, right? Especially small birds. So we're going to talk about the settings, tips that I use to gain focus on the birds, and then also how to set up so you can get close to the birds so the birds can be larger in frame. And the first thing we're going to talk about is camera settings. Now this is not going to be an exhaustive description of every kind of camera setting you need for different species. This is going to be a general rule of thumb, just setting some guidelines that you can think about when you're out in the field so you can set yourself up for success. Now with birds, because they're constantly moving, it's important to have the right shutter speed. And because of this, one thing you can do to kind of ease some of your frustration with camera settings is to shoot in your shutter priority mode. So that's different in different camera brands, but basically you set your shutter speed and then the camera sets your aperture and ISO automatically, so you don't have to think about everything. That's one thing you can do to just kind of alleviate some of the struggles of getting proper exposure, allow your camera to do some of that for you. Now I shoot in all manual mode, so that means I set my shutter speed, aperture, and ISO by myself. That's just how I've always done it. But I do it in 3 simple steps. So it's really simple once you kind of understand the concepts of things. So the first thing I do is I set my aperture. So I set my aperture wide open. So for me, on my lens, the 150 to 400, that's going to be f4.5 or f5.6, so I'm using the internal teleconverter. So I set my aperture first, that's number 1. Then I set my shutter speed based on the subject I'm going to try to photograph or likely to find and photograph. And we're going to talk about kind of understanding shutter speeds here in a second. And then I set my ISO to fill in the exposure to get proper exposure there. So it's really 3 simple steps. And whether you're shooting in manual mode or if you're shooting in shutter priority mode, the important thing to understand is understanding what shutter speed you need to set your camera to get sharp images of that bird. It's more important, and I always tell people to make sure you have the proper shutter speed to freeze the action you're looking to capture, rather than, oh, I don't want my ISO to go too high because it's going to make a noisy image. Well, your image is going to be worthless if it's blurry because you don't have a proper shutter speed anyway. So make sure you have your shutter speed where you want it to. Try to have as much light coming in through your lens as possible, and then set your ISO to whatever it needs to be to get that proper exposure and that sharp image. There's a general idea of understanding the size of the subject you're going to photograph and how fast your shutter speed needs to be. And also understanding that obviously if a subject is moving, you're going to need a faster shutter speed than if that subject is stationary. Larger subjects, you can get away with a slower shutter speed even if there is motion compared to a smaller subject that is moving. So let me say this again in a different way. Let's compare a northern harrier versus a tree swallow. Okay, so they're both flying. Even if they're both flying at the same speed, the tree swallow is going to look like it's moving faster because it's going to be beating its wings faster, it's going to be moving faster relative to its size. So you're going to need a faster shutter speed to freeze that motion compared to the northern harrier, even if they're moving at the same rate through the sky. Okay, I hope that makes sense, but it's just a general idea, and you can even observe this. So if you're watching, think of like a Canada goose that's flying, okay? They have very drawn out and dramatic wing beats because they don't need to flap their wings as fast to get the lift that they need to fly. Compared to, think of like a small little wren, okay? It has really short stubby wings, it's a really small bird. That thing flaps its wings like crazy to take off. And in order, if you want to capture those wings completely sharp and frozen, you're going to need a fast shutter speed to freeze that because the wings are just moving so much faster compared to a swan or a goose or an eagle. Anything that's large, they have a more drawn out and flowy kind of smooth wing beat compared to the sudden flaps of a hummingbird or a wren or a warbler, anything like that. So how do I set my camera when I'm going out? If I'm just going out to hike and I'm not sure what I'm going to find or what I'm going to come across, I generally set my camera to something around 1/1000th of a second. I have my eye aperture all the way open to let in as much light. I set my shutter speed to about 1/1000th of a second, depending on light. And then I have my ISO to fill in the exposure. That 1/1000th of a second is going to allow me to pretty much capture a sharp image of most things I come across in the forest. So if I come across a woodpecker, a sparrow, anything like that, the 1/1000th of a second is going to give me a really good starting point to get some frozen motion in that image, and then I can adjust quickly from there. If I can, drop my shutter speed lower if the bird is perched and not moving, and then I can drop my ISO down if I need to. So it's just kind of a good starting point that you can then adjust from there. And something I always say as well is your camera bodies are made so that you can adjust your aperture, which is up here, your shutter speed, which is back here, and then ISO, which is usually a button and a dial. Your cameras are made to be able to adjust these three settings really quickly and easily for a purpose, right? They're not made to be set and then forget. You're gonna have to adjust things as you're in the field. Don't just think that, oh, I have my shutter speed 1/1000th of a second, I can just leave it like that and I can get away with everything. No, there's gonna be instances where you can drop your shutter speed lower, or you may need to increase your shutter speed to be able to freeze that motion if there's just a really quick burst of activity. One thing I will say with the OM system cameras is the stabilization in it. If you have a stationary subject, I can get away with doing like a shutter speed of 1/100th of a second, even slower maybe, and still get sharp images with a bird that's stationary and perched. So you can really get away with some really slow shutter speeds with these cameras now with stabilization. All right, now the next thing I want to talk about is gaining focus. So this is often the hardest part because the birds are so small, they're moving quickly. It's hard to get your camera to focus on the bird so you can get sharp images. You're not going to get sharp images if you can't get the bird in focus, right? Now the first thing to think about is figuring out a way to make the subject stand out in the frame. So what I mean by that, you can either have it so that the bird comes out on a perch that's more exposed. You can make it so that it is far away from your background, so there's some separation with the background and kind of the surrounding environment. You can make it stand out through some contrast. So if you're photographing, say, a dark bird in a bright area, you can have that stand out really quickly in there, or maybe a white swan in a dark area. You can have that white bird stand out really well. Your camera will quickly and easily pick that bird up and have success with that. Now, a lot of this, if you're thinking about making the bird stand out on a perch or kind of have it come out and away from a lot of vegetation, a lot of distractions for your camera, a lot of that has to do with thinking proactively and being less reactive with your photography. So that kind of comes into planning a perch or setting yourself up on location so that you can actually have that bird in a nice perch and more exposed and have that bird stand out. And we're going to talk more about that coming up. But that's one really quick, easy way to make your camera recognize the subject. Or even if you're not using subject to text, just using regular autofocus modes, it'll really help your camera grab focus on that subject because it recognizes that this is kind of in the foreground and is standing out in the frame. The next important thing to think about, and something I really use a lot, is adjusting your autofocus box or using the correct autofocus area mode. Now in the OM1 Mark II, you're able to customize and have custom autofocus box sizes for your area modes. And I use 4 different sizes plus the whole area mode. And I do this in consecutively larger box sizes. So depending on what I'm photographing, I will use a box size that suits the subject that I'm photographing. So if I'm photographing a small bird that is pretty small in frame, I'm going to use basically a single box size to focus on that subject because I don't need the camera to be confused by everything around the bird. I just want to put that box right over the bird. The camera's going to recognize, okay, just focus on this area in the frame and focus on the bird within that frame. If you kind of get closer to that subject, you can get away with increasing the box size so that it not only makes it so that your camera recognizes that still is the subject, but also make it so you don't have to have the box directly over your subject because that can be challenging as well, especially with moving subjects. And then if you're photographing really large subjects or subjects that are moving erratically, then you can use larger box sizes because then you don't need to be as precise with the autofocus over the subject. And your camera can kind of take care of the rest. And as the subjects become larger, your camera's going to have an easier time picking up that subject and identifying that is a bird. So another kind of takeaway there is to try to get closer to your subject if that's what you're trying to do. If your camera's just not focusing on things and you want the bird larger in frame anyway, you need to get closer to that subject so that you can ensure focus that way. Next tip would be to limit the autofocus distance. So a lot of lenses, you're able to have a limiter switch for the autofocus distance and the focusing distance. So you can do that if you know that the subject is going to be a certain distance away from you and you have a switch that you can limit. Okay, well, I don't need to focus from 6 meters to the closest focusing distance. The subject's farther away than 6 meters. Well, then set it so that it's a 6 meters to infinity so that you don't end up having the camera try to go through the entire focusing range to try to find the subject. It just is limited that way. It just makes it quicker for your camera to, if you lose focus, to try to rack focus through the focusing range. It doesn't go through the entire one. It's kind of limited to a certain distance. Just remember, if you do set that, don't forget that you've set that, because there are times when I've hit the switch, I'm like, okay, I only need it to focus on this certain distance, but then I move on to the next location. I'm like, oh, my camera's not focusing, what's going on? I didn't readjust the switch, so it wasn't able to focus on that new subject because it was actually closer or farther away from where I had the switch initiated. Another thing I also do is on the lens, the 150 to 400 lens, you're able to set basically a preset focusing distance. So you're able to gain focus. So if a bird is perching consistently on the specific perch, I'm able to lock focus on that perch, set focus using one of these buttons here, and then it is set. I'm able to go along and photograph, things that come closer, things that move farther away. But then when that bird comes right onto that perch, I'm able to press this button. It's going to lock right back onto that preset focusing distance, and I'm able to get a quick shot of that bird before it flies off that perch. It's a really quick and easy way to, if you know birds land on a specific perch, maybe if you're in a photo blind and there's certain perches at certain distances, you're able to set your preset focusing distance to one of those perches, and when that bird lands on it, you're able to push a button, it immediately snaps right to that distance, and you have nice, sharp, focused images. And then the last little tip I have for focusing is actually, what happens if, I said before, try to get your subject to be kind of out away from distractions in the frame, try to make it on an exposed perch and all that kind of stuff. Well, that's all great and dandy, but a lot of times you can't do that, right? Because these birds are kind of down in the shrubby areas, they're in the vegetation, they're in leaves. You can't always have them come out and be exposed. And one tip I have is actually using manual focus. I have really good success with it if you have a subject that is stationary or moving kind of slowly, just kind of hopping around slowly. The autofocus isn't able to focus on the bird because there's a lot of distractions in the foreground or the background, or it's just in a bush that has a lot of leaves. Use manual focus. Turn on focus peaking if you have it, and that way you're able to visualize what's in focus with focus peaking, and you're able to get that shot. It takes some time to get used to it. You have to kind of learn which way you need to turn the focusing dial to figure out if you need to turn it clockwise to get closer or counterclockwise to get closer. It's different for different brands. But just get comfortable with it and use it, and you'll be able to have a lot of success for subjects that are in brush that your camera's just not able to lock on. Another thing I commonly use manual focus for is actually for birds in flight and moving subjects, where it's oftentimes quicker if your camera locks onto the background or the foreground. It's oftentimes quicker to use manual focus to try to get the bird or subject relatively in focus in your viewfinder, so that way your camera can actually find the subject. If you just keep pressing the autofocus on button or whatever you're using for autofocus, you're probably just going to keep locking onto that background or that foreground, and you're going to miss a lot of the chances to actually lock onto that subject. But if you use and engage manual focus to kind of get the focus distance roughly where the subject is, so that the subject is somewhat in view in the viewfinder, then your camera will often have a lot easier time locking on once you engage the autofocus again on that subject. So that's a really useful way of using manual focus as well. All right, now the last series of tips I'm going to talk about is basically how to get yourself set up so that the birds come out on the perch that you want, and kind of be more proactive and plan your shots versus just walking along and trying to take pictures as you come across things. And it kind of alluded to this of just being more have more planning put into your shots. So if you see a bird, and a lot of this just takes time, and just take some time to observe what the birds are doing, kind of learn their behavior, learn what they're going to do and how they're going to act. So if you're out in an area, say like we're out in the grasslands here today, there's a whole bunch of sparrows, and you can even put this to the northern harrier. So if there's a certain section of the field that they're hunting, or for the sparrows, is there a certain bush that they're perching on? You can observe that, recognize that, and then you're really able to plan your shots. So you kind of have to think of it as kind of working backwards. Instead of seeing the subject and getting the shot and then worrying about the background and composition after the fact, you end up kind of thinking of the composition first, finding the perch, finding the background, finding the lighting that you want, setting yourself up, sitting and waiting for that subject to then enter the frame, and you can get the shot. So it's kind of a backwards way of thinking, but it's a really good way to get those shots where the subject is really standing out. You again have a really nice perch, and you can get nice and close to the subject because you would have been there for a little while. They would have gotten comfortable with you, and you're able to get that shot. Especially this works really well if you have a lens that's maybe not a huge magnification. Maybe if you're using like a 400mm lens or a 300mm lens, even like a 200mm lens, you're going to need to get very close to your subjects. And the best way to do that is to find a location where they frequent, move into that position, set yourself up, and sit and wait and just be patient. And eventually the birds will come close to you, and you'll be able to kind of tie all this information together and get yourself the shots that you're looking for. That's how you see a lot of these images of, you know, a bird that's on a beautiful perch with a beautiful background. It wasn't just happenstance that this photographer just showed up. I mean, you're not going to get that probably 90% of the time when you're just hiking through the woods and reacting. No, it takes some planning. It takes understanding that, okay, this is a perch that you want a bird to land on. It doesn't even matter what bird lands on at that point. It's just a really nice perch, really nice background. You set yourself up for that, and then as the birds come onto that perch, you're able to get the shots. It's kind of the concept with using photo blinds, right? There's perches already set up, and the idea is these perches are nice spots for the birds to come. And you're not necessarily hoping for a specific subject necessarily, but you're set yourself up and are ready for whatever comes to that perch. Now, this was obviously not an exhaustive list, right? There's a lot of different tips and techniques you can use, but these are just some things that I think about when I'm out in the field. And if you found this video helpful, check out my other videos, gear-related kind of tips and techniques videos. I did a few a little while ago. I'm trying to get back into them just to kind of help share more tips and techniques for things in these kind of videos. If there's anything that you use or any tips and techniques you use, let us know in the comments below. I read all my comments. I enjoy reading all the comments and love hearing from you. And it's a nice community down there that's kind of forming on this channel that I like to try to share more knowledge with them as well. If you're watching the video, if you have something else that you use frequently that helps you have success in photographing birds, let us know so we can all become better photographers and just better naturalists and learn together through photography. And if you see little comments down below with individuals with little birds next to their name, those are my channel members. So for less than a cup of coffee each month, they're helping to directly support me in this channel, help me continue to make videos like this one. A huge thank you to those members, having a nice community grow. And if you're looking to join and become a channel member yourself, there's a link down below in the description where you can join. If you're looking for a free method to share your support, you can also subscribe to my channel. I really appreciate all of those that have subscribed and continue to subscribe. It really helps my videos and my channel reach new audiences, which I'm trying to do. So thank you for that. That's going to be it for me today. I hope you enjoyed this one, and I'll see you again really soon.